Albion Online patch number 4 for the Foundations update is now live on all servers June 17th, 2024. And we're going to look at the changes that are surprising. Some of the changes were actually dialed back by the developers, and a surprising nerf comes to a beloved weapon in the game. So let's look at it. I want to hear your thoughts with this as well. All right, let's go with the crossbows. The divine energy on the energy shaper, the channel time from 4 seconds to 3 seconds, 3.3 to be exact, the number of ticks from 13 to 11, and the damage per tick versus players is like 96. So basically this is making it so that the energy shaper deals almost the same damage, I would assume here, almost the same damage as shorter period of time, making it more viable for ZVZ or even small scale, mostly ZVZ situations here for the energy shaper. Really good change. It may make the energy shapers like come back to the meta. Some of the ZVZ players are saying, there are still better DPS weapons out there. So we'll see if the energy shaper gets another buff for the next patches of Albion Online. Moving on to the Quarterstaff. It's the same as energy shaper, the dark matter on all Quarterstaff, number of ticks from 10 to 8, damage per tick versus players 78 to 98. So almost the same concept, shorter ticks, higher damage. I'm assuming it's almost the same output, just a little bit more maybe, but the same output as the previous patch for the dark matter. Again, the dark matter isn't really something that a lot of players actually use. Maybe again in like small scale fights, but in small scale fights, it's really easier to, or more beneficial to just use your armor piercer. So again, this is probably not going to change a lot for the Quarterstaff. Moving on to the daggers. The daggers, the lunging stabs on the bloodletter. When hitting a player below 40% health, cooldown is now reduced by 50%. Cooldowns from 30 seconds to 35 seconds. So this is basically a nerf to the mobility of the bloodletter. It's still going to be almost the same cooldowns if you actually hit the player. Because in the previous patch, I believe if you hit a player below 40% health, the cooldown of that skill gets reduced by 40%. Now, this is going to be reduced by 50% if you hit a player below 40%. And the cooldown is going to be from 30 seconds to 35 seconds. So basically what they're trying to do here is make the bloodletter still very effective, but not very good when it comes to using their E ability to just have mobility. During fighting, you are still going to use the bloodletter the same with your less than 40% you E, same cooldowns essentially. But if you're trying to run away with it using the E to create distance, that will give you 5 seconds more cooldown. So that's basically the theme of what's happening here for the bloodletters. And we're going to see that as well in other weapons later on. For the fire staff, the pyroblast, the one-handed fire staff, that's the E ability, the 0, 0.6, and 1.2. They're all going to get nerfed by 5%. And this is something that all fire staff users, including myself, don't really care about. It's a 5% damage reduction. It's not really going to completely overhaul your playstyle with the fire staff. It's going to be the same. 5% nerf to the fire staff E. Not really. If they really wanted to nerf the fire staff, this would have been at least like 10-15% reduction in damage, but it's just 5%. So nothing to write home about. You can still use the fire staff for corrupted dungeons and for other contents that you use one-hand fire staff for. Moving on to the Great Hammer, this is actually a new thing. The Grasp of the Undead for the Tome Hammer, added hit point reduction 10%, and the hit point reduction duration of 3 seconds. So this is similar to how the Realm Breaker works. The Realm Breaker, basically, if it hits you, you are going to reduce your max health, and it has a duration. So basically the same concept for the Tome Hammer. This is a really good addition to the Tome Hammer because it is kind of underrepresented. The only people that I know that uses a Tome Hammer regularly is like Nazari. And there's also one viewer that came by our chat earlier that said he's very excited about the Tome Hammer and he uses it in Stalker, or actually Slayer Corrupted Dungeons, and uses it via basically just a reset build, a stun build, a trap build, and was very, very, very excited about it. So we'll see if we see more Tome Hammers in Corrupted Dungeons, or maybe even in the Mist. I don't know. Probably not in the Mist, but Corrupted Dungeons maybe, or even 2v2 Hellgates. All right, let's go with the Quarterstaffs. A lot of changes here. The stun run on all Quarterstaffs movement speed buff now ends upon attacking, meaning you no longer can, in 2v2 Hellgate especially, use your stun run when you're trying to reset, stun, and still have the buff to walk away or run away, create some distance. So now when you use your stun run, the moment you use the effect of the stun run, which stuns, you will no longer have the entire buff. So just one-time use, boom, it's done. For the Rising Blow on all Quarterstaffs, the cooldown reduction per player hit is from 12% to 15%, stacks up to 3 times. Something that we have seen in the previous notes that we have looked at. It's a buff here, so it's not really something to write home about. That's okay. Moving on to the Separator. Again, this is another questionable, like, why are you even adding these kinds of buffs when they're not really going to be that effective? It's just changing things for the sake of changing things. The Separator on all Quarterstaffs now deals 80 damage to all untargeted enemies. Again, Soaring Swipe on the double-bladed staff. Similar to how the Bloodletter is going to get nerfed, the cooldown is from 20 seconds to 25 seconds, but hitting an enemy player reduces the ability of the cooldown by 20%. So again, it's essentially the same, 20 seconds to 25 seconds. So it's essentially the same, 20 seconds to 25 seconds cooldown. If you hit an enemy with your E ability, it gets reduced by 20 seconds. So essentially the same. It's essentially the same if you actually hit an enemy. So similar to how the Bloodletter is being nerfed, you can no longer use your Soaring Swipe to create distance effectively, or as effective as in the previous patch. You now can still use it for attacking people, not just for mobility and being safe, completely 1000% safe during fighting, especially in the Mist. And they're also reducing the radius from 6 meters to 5 meters. Shapeshifter staffs, the Pulse Shock on all of the staffs, damage from 124 to 109. So around, I think this is like around 12% damage reduction. The thing about Pulse Shock though is it's not really about the damage that makes it OP. It's about the damage resistance shred that can stack up to 3 times. So if you don't know, Pulse Shock deals damage and also shreds your resistance. And because of how Albion Online system works, is it shreds resistances first and then deals damage. So reducing the damage here is a good first step to actually maybe discourage people from using Pulse Shock. But in 2v2 Hellgates, in the Mist, in maybe small scale, you just have that damage shred resistance. And that is what makes it really, really powerful. And if they really want to change or like make it nerfed, I would tackle the damage shred more than the damage. But that's just me. It's still very powerful though. I used the Hellspawn staff in 2v2 Hellgates today. It's still very viable. Again, the damage doesn't really come from the Pulse Shock. It's more about their furry form than anything else. The Tectonic Shift though. The Earth Rune staff, hit point reduction from 15% to 10%. So that is definitely going to change a little bit of strategy maybe, but not really. 5% hit point reduction. If you have like a really good comp, it's not really something that you have to worry about. But yeah, they will have 5% more health compared to the last patch. Moving on to the Spears, the Harpoon on all Spears max range is from 18 meters to 20 meters, and the projectile speed, no, this is not a typo, 23.33 meters per second to 23.53 meters per second. I don't even know why they increased it by that much. I don't know if that's really going to change things, but maybe increasing the range a little bit, increasing the speed a little bit, makes it more viable. But yeah, you can see this being used maybe in corrupted dungeons in against kiters, maybe you can see that, but it could be good. This is just a little bit weird. Like the 0.2 meters per second is really weird. Really weird. But the max range is actually good though. The additional 2 meters, right? 20 meters, almost as rangy as the armor piercer now. So that's pretty good. You could see this being used in corrupted dungeons, that's for sure. All right, this is the biggest surprise of the update, the official one at least. The Fearless Strike on the Carving Sword. They reduced the damage from 150.10 to 135. Similar though, again, to the Pulse Shock nerf. It shreds damage resistance and then deals damage. So if they really want to nerf the Carving Sword, they want to nerf the damage shred resistance rather than the damage. But, you know, it's a welcome change, I would say. We were talking about this last week, how all of the meta basically got nerfed except for the Carving Sword. And I guess the developers heard that and they were like, oh yeah, we forgot about the Carving Sword. So they're nerfing it a little bit. 15 damage, again, not that much. Still going to be really good for the Mist. And it's still going to dominate the Mist, especially since the counterparts, like the Bloodletter, the Prowling Staff in the last patch, and now the Q4 on the Shapeshifters got nerfed. I think the Fearless Strike and the Carving Sword still going to be there in the meta for the Mist in the future. All right, the Spinning Blades. Again, this is like the biggest shock in this update right now. The Spinning Blades on the dual swords. What we thought was dead. They got revived. The auto attack damage increase buff is from 100% to 65%. In the previous patch notes, this was actually completely removed, where dual sword, when you E when you land, you have no more attack buff. So this was the nerf 2 weeks ago in the test server. Remove 50% attack speed buff and increase the duration from 3 seconds to 4 seconds. Oh, in this official patch, they're actually making the auto attack damage increase from 100 to 65 and not completely removing the attack speed buff, but making it only 30%. So in this previous patch, I think this is a bigger nerf in my opinion. Maybe almost the same, but they are removing the increase in the auto attack damage. Not really. Right. So they're nerfing the auto attack damage and nerfing the speed buff rather than completely getting rid of the speed buff and maintaining the 100% on the auto attack damage. So this is actually a good compromise because we all thought dual swords were just dead in Albion Online. So this is actually really good. So you are still getting the buff, just 30% instead of 50, but you are going to get reduced attack damage buff from 100 to 65. And the duration going to be 3 seconds to 4 seconds as well compared to this patch right here. Actually, if you think about it, with that additional buff, 1 second more, that's 33% more, getting reduced the speed buff by 20% and 35% of the auto attack damage. It's almost the same, I think. I think it's almost the same. Well, it's a little bit of a nerf, but I think it's not too big to a point where it dies. I can still see dual swords being part of the meta, especially for corrupted dungeons, even in like 2v2 Mists or 2v2 Hellgates. It can still be used, I think. It's still pretty good. It's still pretty good. The helmets, the Mistwalker hood from 30 seconds to 25 seconds. Now I want to reference the other patch again. So the Mistwalker hood, their initial plan was 30 seconds to 25 seconds, but also reduce the duration from 6 seconds to 5 seconds. Now they took the duration nerf out. They just buffed the Mistwalker hood. So this is very interesting. This is very exciting because they are actually buffing the Mistwalker hood and not really rebalancing it. So if you have watched some of my videos, you are going to notice that I'm in love with the Mistwalker hood with the immortality. So I think I'm going to create more builds for this one. This is actually exciting. All right, for the shoes of the After Image Mistwalker shoes, the first cast, 15 seconds to 12 seconds, which is pretty good. Mistwalker shoes is usually used for 2v2 Hellgates. I've seen healers use that. So the first cast cooldown from 15 seconds to 12 seconds, pretty good buff right there. For the Royal March on the Royal Boot, the movement speed per stack is from 8% to 9%. That gives you 90% more movement speed when you full stack them. This is actually good to complement builds that have really, really low mobility, like the Quarterstaff. You can use the Royal Boots to stack up your movement speed and just keep on chasing your opponents, or maybe just run away from it, which is, again, really good buff. This is the most important one though. We're going to look at this. Fix an issue where Enfeebled Blades on the Lifecurse Staff would inflict too much damage and unintended slow effects. So this was abused by a lot of players in Hellgates, Corrupted Dungeons, and it's just, there were bug abusers. Basically, if you didn't notice, the Lifecurse E, the Enfeebled Blades, would actually slow you down, even though the effect when you read on screen doesn't have any slow effect. It would slow you down. And after the first hit, it would actually have really high damage, unknown damage. It's not written in the skill description. It just deals more damage between the first and the second tick. It's like more than twice the first and second tick. So now they no longer can abuse the Enfeebled Blades, which is good. I love it. Bug abusers out there. That is actually it for the patches for this one, for June 17th, patch number 4. But before we go, there is actually another patch. If you remember, they also called this, there you go. Patch 4 is already locked in, listed as planned to go as patch 4, mainly focused on survivability and the goal of these fights, less focused brawl comps, blah, 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 right? These are nowhere to be found. So maybe they needed, like, they should have said patch 4 is already locked in and this is going to be the next patch, patch number 5. So we had like 2 patches, which was really weird. And we all assumed that they're going to be just combined and be added as well. So this, I guess, is not yet in. Like the capes, the armors, like the jacket tenacity that we talked about in the previous video as well. This is not yet part of the patch number 4. So this is definitely going to be patch number 5. But yeah, that's patch number 4. I really like how they are trying to tackle the meta, trying to shift the meta. They didn't really buff anything of significance here. So no buffs, more of like major nerfs and like tiny buffs. So we still don't know what the meta is going to be because all of the meta were nerfed. I'm assuming since all of the meta were nerfed, we're going to stay in the same meta until they buff something else. But we are going to see in the future, and we are still have that patch number 5 to wait for. So if you have any comments whatsoever, let's discuss in the comment section below, or better yet, join us live on Twitch at twitch.tv/Burnstone.